to you. Good morning. Good morning to you. You. Good morning. Good morning. Won't you share with a friend or two? Good morning. Good morning to you. You. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning to you. You. Good morning. Good morning to you. And many more. And many more. And many more. Good morning, good morning, good morning, and welcome, welcome, welcome to Daring Dialogues Black Table Talk Edition. I am your host today, Shantae Charles. Just want to give a public service announcement to my Black Table Talk Facebook page. I will no longer be live streaming on this page. Um, Unfortunately, Meta has chosen to make itself the free to hate space versus the free speech and accurate history space. So, because of that, I know that I cannot say in this space on Meta what I need to say. On yesterday, Meta took down this picture. This is a historic picture. This is actual history, but Meta took it down. And then when I appealed the decision, Meta said we are removing it because it goes against our standard on dangerous organizations and it contains symbols, glorification, or support of people and organizations we define as dangerous. So I find it very interesting that Meta would choose to take down a historic picture that shows the accuracy of the connection between white Christian nationalists and terrorism. They would choose to remove this historically accurate image, but they won't remove all of the pages of white Christian nationalists on their platform. That's hypocritical. Okay. And so, because of that, I will no longer be streaming on this page. We will be streaming on YouTube from today moving forward. So I have left our YouTube channel link because we are there live now. I've left our YouTube channel link. So if you want to continue to hear our live streams on topics concerning Black people, go to our YouTube link, subscribe, and come watch us live. I will continue to post, of course, on this page, but because I know that this is not a free speech platform. It's a free hate platform, but it's not a free speech platform. All right. My streaming and my podcast is no longer going to be streamed on this space. Why? Because I don't want another notice saying, oh, you're talking about something that we want to hide. Okay. So, because of that, I'm going to end this broadcast. And if you want to catch us live streaming, click on the link inside of the comment section. Once this processes, it'll be a few seconds. Click on that link and you can join us live right now on YouTube. Thank you so very much for your time and your attention. See you there. All right. So, good morning. Again, I am dealing with Facebook's continued hypocrisy around not wanting to show history as it was, because it is certainly most definitely shaping the right now. They don't want to show history as it was. They want to hide the connection between pseudo supremacy and the Christian faith. That's the only explanation I can give for them snatching this photo down and saying, oh, it glorifies support of people and organizations we define as dangerous. But none of the other stuff y'all have up on there is glorifying people. None of the other alt-right pages is glorifying people that is being defined as dangerous. All of that stuff gets to stay up. The memes, the monkey memes, the calling Black people out of their name. I've seen vile racist stuff on Meta that doesn't get taken down because it does not violate the community guidelines. But an actual historical photo showing what these people are, that violates their guidelines. History violates their guidelines. History violates their guidelines, but not the other stuff. Not the other stuff. So, yeah, that is where we are right now in our country. They told me, if you feel like this was, you know, if you feel like this was wrong, go ahead and appeal the decision. So I appealed it and I said, you all are misrepresenting why this photo is up in the first place. It's historic. It's actual evidence. It's history. You know what they said? This is what they said. We reviewed it and we took it down. Your appeal was reviewed and your piece does not follow our community standards for dangerous individuals and organizations. So if you recognize that they are dangerous individuals and organizations, why are you still supporting all of the other white nationalist groups that come out of the dangerous individuals and organizations? Does that make any sense to y'all? Right? What this means for you. Here's what it means. All right. Reduction of your page's distribution, restriction for your page's admins, and removal of your page. So because I shared an actual historical photo that exposes what America is, my page could possibly be removed. Not the millions of pages that are actually spouting hate online. No, theirs will stay up. But because I shared a historical photo showing the connection between pseudo supremacy and the Christian religion, my page is the one that could be removed. I want y'all to think about that. Just think about it. This is how genocides begin. And I know we just jumped right on into the topic. Shoot. This is how genocides begin. Because you start erasing the history that would condemn you. You start erasing the history that would expose you. Then you erase the history that would condemn your behavior and your atrocities. And then from there, you start erasing the people. Okay. Good morning. So that's how that happens. That's how that happens. That's how you can get 70,000 people into a stadium following God knows what, with 130,000, give or take, outside. That's how we get to that point, by removing truth and substituting it with propaganda over and over and over and over and over again until the people whose heritage is so villainous that they want to erase it and now rewrite a new story for themselves as angelic and martyrs. That's how we get there. We get there by ignoring actual historical fact and data. That's how we get there. And they're doing it again in real time. And so Meta is with the foolishness. And the problem with, because somebody said, well, just go to some other sites. Blue Sky has the same issue. Blue Sky has pseudo supremacists over there. Substack has the same issue. The right people who are writing on Substack are dealing with the same exact issue over there. Mm-hmm. Maybe not as intense yet, but they're still dealing with it. Meta owns IG, Threads, and Facebook. And again, if we know our history, or if you were taught history properly, right, you would know that that's a monopoly. When it comes to social media, it's a monopoly. Has our government decided to break up the monopoly yet? Absolutely not. Because as long as we have corruption in our government that takes oodles and boodles and noodles of money from Meta, they're not going to break up the monopoly. So the places to actually show and document real and true history have to be in our own hands. And this is why I tell people, now, if you have not started doing it, now is the time for you to be creating your own library and curating your library with books while they are still unaltered. Because they're already rewriting a whole new fable and fairy tale for themselves. So this is the time. If you're gonna create a library of resources, this would be the time to go find books that have not yet been altered, because it's coming. It's coming. Where you're not your books are gonna read completely different. Yeah. It's happening already with schools. They're already doing it in curriculum there. But in general, go ahead and build your library now. Go ahead and find some history books now, because they're rewriting a whole new world, a whole new world of whiteness, and they have done nothing wrong. So, yeah, this is where we are. This is where we are. Let's get into Black AF history, the unwhitewashed story of America. We are still in Earth, Wind, and America. And Michael Harriot is leading us through the topic of the failing English settlement. So we'll read a section of this, and yeah, we'll try to get to a good stopping point, I think. Word got back to the English that the settlement was flailing worse than Kenny G in an HBCU halftime show. Not only weren't they finding any gold, but when they ventured out into the countryside and climbed the highest hills in the area, they still couldn't see the Pacific Ocean. And then, of course, you leave Meta and then you come to YouTube and you still have people that can't act right on YouTube. So yeah, no escaping stuff. Not only weren't they finding any gold, but when they ventured out into the countryside and climbed the highest hills in the area, they still couldn't see the Pacific Ocean. Yes, they seriously thought they could find a path to Asia a few miles from their settlement. King James was so determined to save his investment that he issued a new charter for the Virginia Company along with a fleet of 9 ships, loaded with supplies and 500 colonists. It was the largest fleet ever amassed in the history of the country until they were separated in a hurricane and yellow fever and the London plague broke out aboard 2 of the ships. Then 2 more were lost at sea. By the time the British re-up arrived in Virginia, the supplies were essentially gone, but there were more people to feed, not less. Smith and the Jamestown governors had to instill a campaign of law and order to keep the desperate colonists from turning the English outer suburbs into a ghetto. In October 1609, Smith was asleep on a sack of gunpowder when it accidentally caught on fire, burning a 10-inch patch of skin in his groin area. Hmm. Fortunately, he was on a boat and jumped in the water where he almost drowned. After his transport to England was delayed for weeks, John Smith left Virginia as an utter failure with nothing to show for his work but a journal, a few stories, and charbroiled private parts. After Smith's unfortunate roast, Wahunsinak summoned Smith's replacement, John Ratcliffe, and 25 of Virginia's most important whites to a big dinner with the promise of more Powhatan government handouts. At the banquet, Ratcliffe discovered that the food baskets were empty and that he had walked straight into a trap. That night, John Ratcliffe was kidnapped, skinned alive, and burned at the stake. It was all part of the chief's plan to rid his land of the pesky whites once and for all by doing what he should have done all along, which was let them starve. With his shoddy leadership in shambles, Jamestown was doomed. As the third winter came upon the settlement, the newcomers were at an all-time low, forced to eat leather belts, their pets, and eventually each other. Yes, that is right. Researchers have found evidence that the few remaining Jamestownnians survived the period known as the starving time by unaliving pregnant women and digesting their own children. This was heralded. The heralded first Americans became cannibals. In May 1610, 142 survivors of King James' ill-fated fleet arrived in a ship they managed to build in Bermuda. One of the passengers, John Rolfe, had lost his wife, daughter, and all of his belongings in the Bermuda shipwreck. By the time he reached Virginia, all he had was a few tobacco seeds that he had collected in Bermuda. He had heard about the new trend of drinking smoke that was becoming popular in Europe and decided to plant those West Indian tobacco seeds. As it turned out, Virginia soil was perfect for tobacco cultivation. When Rolfe and the company landed, the chief was still tripping. The number 1 chief Rocca had almost successfully starved out the white invaders and still commanded a large native force. When the Bermuda ship arrived, in fact, only 60 of the hundreds of English colonizers were left. But one extremely savage colonist, Deputy Governor Samuel Argall, had a plan. Argall was the embodiment of pure evil, known for attacking French and Dutch settlements and claiming them for the king. When Argall failed at capturing a settlement, he would just resort to Plan B and set fire to it, as he did with a Jesuit colony and a French settlement in present-day Maine. Argall first tried to force the chief into submission by burning native villages to the ground. When that didn't work, he discovered the chief's weakness was his daughter, Matoaka. The white folk called her Pocahontas because, as we had established, they were terrible at names. In April 1613, Argall kidnapped Matoaka by luring her onto his ship. He offered to exchange her for English prisoners who had ventured outside the camp. When the chief agreed, Argo reneged on the deal and demanded more provisions. The chief agreed again, but Argo would never release his daughter. Instead, she converted to Christianity and was married off to Rolf. It turns out the white conversion plan worked on the second try. The chief told his warriors to chill out and gave Rolf thousands of acres as a wedding dowry. In 1614, Rolf exported a few barrels of his first tobacco crop, and the English loved it. It was the first positive news from the Virginia Company since the fake gold incident in 1608. With its success evident, the question became who would farm this new cash crop? The few settlers that remained were not quite the agricultural type, considering they could barely keep themselves alive. To solve the problem, Argyle took John and Madawaska to England for an investor relations trip in 1616. However, the trip was cut short when Pocahontas, or Madawaska, died suddenly of an unknown illness. Her tribesmen believe she had been poisoned, while some historians think it was a respiratory illness or dysentery. Whatever the cause, Argyle brought the newly widowed Rolfe back to Virginia without a solid plan. Meanwhile, back in Virginia, the Chickahominy natives, who weren't under the chief's confederacy, helped feed the lazy British settlers who still hadn't planted enough food to feed themselves. When the chief died April 1618, the natives decided to stop offering government assistance to the settlers. Ending this welfare to work program would doom the unskilled English encroachers. They desperately needed help. The only thing that could possibly save the English colony would be an influx of immigrants who they knew what they were doing. Once again, Jamestown was on the precipice of failure. The English investors were demanding their money, but King James didn't have it. Rolfe had land, but it was essentially worthless because he couldn't farm it. After a summer heat wave, colonists were preparing for a second starving time because investors were refusing to send more supplies until they got paid. In July 1619, the Virginia Company held its first legislative assembly. During the meetings, the assembly decided that if the company was going to survive, the colonists should probably grow enough food to feed themselves. Instead of using 75% of the land to grow tobacco while depending on the native welfare system, America's first white legislative body limited tobacco production to 25% of a plantation's output and decided to give away plots of land to the investors. While this plan seems reasonable on its head, the truth was they still didn't know how to farm and had not attempted. So to pretend they'd suddenly understand and be able to provide for themselves was truly outlandish. There's a word for doing something over and over again and expecting different results. American. This American experiment was pretty much over. With no food, no gold, and rumors swirling about their homeland, about their people eating habits, where they would even find skilled, hardworking people who knew how to build a country from scratch? Certainly not in England. You heard what Cicero said. So, where were they going to get these skilled, hardworking people who already knew how to build a country from scratch? James Rolfe's homeboy showed up with some cargo that would save the bumbling British colonists from extinction. On October 12th or 13th, 1616, Spanish Captain Manuel Mendez de Acuna left Spain with a letter authorizing the private ship to transport kidnapped Africans from Africa to Veracruz, Mexico, excuse me. Although the San Juan Bautista was only licensed to carry 200 enslaved persons, Acuna left Luanda, Angola with at least 350 stolen Africans. By the time the 115-ton vessel reached Jamaica, approximately 143 of them had died. Like most enslaved traders, Acuna had planned it this way. Human traffickers routinely overpacked their vessels in order to maximize profit. In Jamaica, he sold 24 young children and headed for Veracruz, where he declared he was carrying 123 humans as cargo. 60 were missing. Shortly before the San Juan Batista arrived in Mexico, 25 Englishmen on a small boat had attacked it in July 1619. After stealing 60 of Acuna's stolen cargo, they had split them between the 160-ton White Lion and the 100-ton Treasurer. The thievish Brits decided to head for the Virginia colony, where they had no chance of being arrested or attacked. When the White Lion landed at Point Comfort in about the latter end of August, Virginia Governor Sir George Yeardley, along with the colony's supply officer, Adam Piercy, negotiated a dirt cheap price for the ship's cargo, 20 and odd Negroes, in exchange for food and, quote, the best and easiest rates they could. And with that, the Jamestown Project was finally saved. This is what made the land worth something. The enslaved labor was worth more than tales of gold and diamond trees. Now that they had a cash crop, abundant land, and people who knew what to do with the land, the abject failure of an experiment had transformed into an unprecedented success. But why Virginia of all places? Why would a smuggler bypass more successful outposts to go to a failing colony? How did they know they would be welcome? In the rare case this story is told, it is cast as a tale of happenstance and coincidence. But of course, it is actually one of deception, trickery, and greed. When John Rolfe took his newly stolen wife to England for that investor relations trip, he traveled to England and returned to the colonies on a ship captained by the vicious Samuel Argall. As soon as they returned, Argall was summoned back to England to answer charges of cruelty against the colonists and for running an international crime ring. To get back to England, Argall had to catch a different ride, as his ship was being captained by Argall's homeboy, a notorious pirate named Daniel Elfrith, who had essentially made a career out of stealing on the high seas. Elfrith had borrowed the treasurer from Argall and hit the jackpot by stealing the stolen Africans from the San Juan Batista. 4 days after the arrival of the White Lion, Elfrith sold 2 or 3 Negroes in Virginia. He probably could have sold more, but he had to leave in a hurry, as Virginia's new governor, George Yeardley, recognized the ship as a well-known pirate vessel and ordered him to leave. Yeardley couldn't resist purchasing a few low-priced human beings before giving him the boot, though. He just knew that it had to be quick. He didn't want his name sullied for dealing with pirates. Virginia didn't need that kind of trouble. Less than a year later, in March 1620, the Virginia colony's first census record recorded 17 women and 15 men who were not Christians in the service of the English. One of them would show up in later documents as Angela or Angelo, a Negro woman. Angela arrived in America as a passenger of Daniel Elfrith's thieving, enslaving, kidnapping, village burning, self-contained criminal enterprise, the Treasurer. It was the ship Argall used to kidnap Madawaska and burn native settlements up and down the coast. It was a stealer of souls that was fueled by greed and theft. And it is as American a theme that has ever existed. Here in the folds and creases of the tale of pilfered people is where America truly lies. That other mystical history that is shared in schools is as real to me as is Atlantis or Oz. It is a gargantuanly tall tale, refined from years of incessant yarn spinning that has been sugar coated and stuffed down our throats. But in the middle room, world built by Dubois and his progeny, we ask the real question to America: how does it feel to be a man stealer, a stealer of men? Or is that the way of the world? Now, three little questions Michael Harriot poses from his first chapter. Number one, what is the difference between a settler and an invader? A, the number of guns you bring to the invasion. B, it depends on who's telling the story. C, invaders become settlers after they vanquish the people they invaded. D, just two different spellings of the same thing. The second question, who were the first Americans? A, the people who were living in the place when the name America was invented. B, the people who came up with the name America but had never been there. C, the people who had united their states in the place called America. Or D, white people. And his last question, rank these savages from least civilized to most civilized. A, people who fought to prevent invaders from stealing their land. B, the human traffickers. C, the people who stole from the human traffickers. D, people who bought stolen property from the human traffickers. Or E, cannibals. Activity. Greetings from your future colonizer. As Director of Corporate Communications for the Virginia Company of London, you are tasked with writing a one-page letter introducing the British colonists to the chief. As truthfully as possible, explain the motives, plans, and intentions of your company in a way that is least likely to result in the Powhatan putting an arrow through your chest. All right. So, Michael Harriot leaves us with a lot to digest and a lot to be thought about. Somebody put up a post here about what we believe in the Bible. If you know, well, if you start doing any amount of study and research, um, there's another book that we started reading from that talked about the people who, way before colonization, were accepting Christianity, pre-colonization. So yeah, there were people who were forced into Christianity, and then there were people who accepted Christianity of their own volition. It was both of those. The history of Christianity in this country is not cut and dry, but people try to make it cut and dry to fit whatever narrative that they're trying to fit. Also consider that while this is happening, because I want people to be thinking about this, while this is happening, King James is putting together his version of the Bible. It's very important that his version of the Bible goes out, because why? They're trying to colonize this new world. They've got to put out an image of God made in their own image. So it makes sense that they would start as they're doing now in 2025. It makes sense that they would start recreating God in their own image. It makes sense that they would whitewash the images of God in their own image. It made sense that it would be merchants, and that it would be clergy, and that it would be political figures that would be posing for the pictures that we now, well, I can't say we, that some now revere. from that time period, thinking that, oh, those were the actual disciples. That's why they look like that. No, it was art in the service of government and religion at the time. So it was well known people. It was people of political influence and power. It was merchants that would sit for these paintings and paint themselves into the story of the gospel. They would paint themselves as disciples, but they were well known people during their time. Okay. Tell you the name of the book for today. This is Black AF History, The Unwhitewashed Story of America by Michael Harriot. Okay. Someone said, and I'm not putting his name out here because I don't want that stuff pulled into my algorithm. CK is the new Messiah. Yes. Some people see it, some people don't. But that's exactly how, in many aspects or respects, that's exactly how we got to Kenny Loggins' Christ way back. That man that many people recognize, okay, as Kenny Loggins Christ was a well-known, influential person of his time. And he gets painted into and cast on into the character of Christ. And for hundreds of years, that those images get carried forward. That's how myth was built around the image. And now in our time in 2025, we're actually seeing the same thing happen in real time. They putting halos on this guy. They dressing him in white. Okay. You're literally seeing how a myth is built in real time. They have made this person larger than life. But will history look back on us? Will history show that there were people who were trying to correct the record? That's the larger question. When we look back 50 years from now, is his face going to be the new face that will be in churches everywhere 50 years later as Jesus? That's creepy, but it's also entirely possible because they so badly want to make him this angelic character. I screenshotted yesterday. I was reading some posts yesterday from um, Caucasian pastors that were almost like he died for them. That is a problem. That is creepy. There's no getting around that. That's creepy. But yet it is happening. Yet it is happening. And so when we look back to Jamestown, when we look back to how they were erasing record, we can look right to 2025 and see how people are erasing historical record in real time. Next week, we're going to come back and we'll be in chapter 2. And I hope the people that are talking about church today will come back for next week because Michael Harriot is going to start tackling that, the church fight that started slavery. The church fight that started slavery. That's chapter 2. All right. My time, I believe, is up. It is way past. I am not going to have time to do my talk back today, but we will be back tomorrow. And I will be able to do the talk back with you then. I want to thank you all for your time and for your attention. This has been another episode of Daring Dialogues, and I've been your host today, Shantae Charles. We're living in a time where people only want to hear their version of events. And I want to move us, hopefully I want to move us past just hearing our version of events. So whether it comes to Christianity, whether it comes to Black history, whether it comes to American history, let's try to look at a fuller picture. There are going to be things that we hear that maybe we haven't heard before, and we'll have to study up on it more. But I feel like this is a good starting place. Michael Harriot does a great job of providing you with resources in the back of his book where he's pulling all of his data and information from. It's not just him talking. He has an index. He has endnotes. He has footnotes. He has a glossary, all of those different things in the back of his book. So he's not just talking to be talking. You can go and look at the source references of everything that he's saying. All right. So you want to join us. This is the book that we are currently reading, Black AF History, the Unwhitewashed Story of America. We're also going to be jumping into this as well, Reparations, a Christian Call for Repentance and Repair. So both of these books is where we'll currently be. All right. But we're going to continue chapter 2 next week in Black AF History. Again, this one is called Reparations, a Christian Call for Repentance and Repair. All right. Thank you all again for your time and attention. Remember, light is the most daring opposition to darkness. So continue to go out and be light. Take care.